NTA. You can't beat the rich.
Information is power. Everyone wants power. So feel powerful with the NTA News mobile app, the one-stop information center. Real news at your fingertip. Be the first to report by uploading first-hand information on the You Report link, and be the first to know by simply clicking on any of the links on the sidebar for headlines, domestic and foreign news, economy, security, politics, sports, and more. Stream live on your smartphone and tablets and stay connected. It's pretty easy. Simply download NTA News app from your Google Play Store and you're good to go. NTA News mobile app, your access to real-time information.
The finals of the Men and Women African Cup of Nations. It's always frenetic. On days such as this, there are no tribes, no religion. Here, Nigerian warriors are out to represent, to show the skills that makes us the best. On days like this, the color is one. The color is green.
As federal government launches reverse edition of counter-terrorism strategy, U.S. Secretary of State pledges support of world powers to check violent extremism.
President Muhammadu Buhari promises to ensure anti-corruption crusade outlives his administration.
$20 billion naira so far committed to execution of federal government special intervention projects.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, our focus is on public-private partnerships for infrastructure delivery. Now, in the popular imagination, there is a belief that government has, as it were, limitless resources to deliver the public goods and services. Now, but however, fiscal and developmental scenarios over time and indeed around the world have, however, shown that this is far from the reality. So, what we now know is that part of the responsibility of any government is to try as much as possible to rake in sufficient revenue and also ensure that it gets the support and partnership it can access to enable it to deliver the public goods and services.
And public-private partnership, PPP for short, is one of such arrangements put in place by some developing countries, including Nigeria, to facilitate and quicken the bridging of infrastructural gaps clearly existing in every part of the country. Let's simply put it this way. A public-private partnership is an agreement between a government agency and a private partner for the purpose of delivering goods and services. Such arrangements are normally provides that both parties share in the reward of the venture, and of course they also share in the risk and responsibilities that comes with it.
All right, Rhoda, there's an aspect that we must also take. President Muhammadu Buhari was speaking recently with regard to public-private partnership as a critical source for infrastructure delivery. Perhaps we'll take that quote right away.
All right. And of course, what he actually said was this, and I quote, "The nation has a huge infrastructural deficit for which we require foreign capital and expertise to supplement whatever resources we can marshal at home." In essence, increased engagement with the outside world is called for as we seek private and public partnership in our quest for entrenched capital and expertise. This is the way of the new world for all centuries in the 21st century. End of quote.
That's right. That's for all countries in the 21st century. You're right, Rhoda. Now, PPP, by the way, has indeed become a global concept and practice. And the fact that the PPP arrangement has survived in Nigeria from one political dispensation to another is another pointer to its usefulness. Now, at the federal level, the PPP, of course, is anchored on the enactment of the legal instrument that empowers the arrangement to be regulated by the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission, ICRC. Now, the law known as the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission Act 2005 was established, that's to say the commission itself was established in 2008. Now, as already indicated, the mandate of the ICRC is unambiguous. That is, to regulate the public-private partnership endeavors of the federal government, which, as we have already noted, was and is still aimed at addressing Nigeria's fiscal infrastructure deficit.
And of course, it goes without saying that government intended for the partnership to work. Sadly, however, many of the PPPs are far from being viable. A good number are far behind take-off dates. Some are stalled for some reasons, varying from documentation to court cases, while a few are outrightly terminated.
In fact, to bring the matter closer home to our audience, information on the website of the ICRC specifically indicates that the concession for the acquisition, installation, operation, and management of world-class integrated system designated in airports such as Murtala Mohammed, Lagos, Abuja, and Kano, that all of that has been terminated. So, is the concession for the development, finance, and maintenance and operation of the transfer of the Warri Port Terminal. But we need to clarify all of these issues with regard to the status of the various projects that we have just indicated, so we get a true picture as well as the way forward.
And of course, yes, that would bring us to the focus of our conversation today on Good Morning Nigeria, which is Public-Private Partnership, PPP for short. And we are glad that you are able to join us this morning on this discussion. My name is Rhoda Obo. Welcome to the program.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I joined Rhoda, not Robo, by the way. I joined Rhoda in also welcoming you to this edition of the program, reaching you as always live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. In the course of the program, we'll come up with our regular companion segments, including newspaper review, business, and others. In the meantime, we're going over to the newsroom, and our newscaster this morning is Laure Bala Hassan. Hi, Laure.
Hi, Kingsley. Good morning and welcome to the news. Former head of state, General Yakubu Gowon, has thrown his weight behind the renewed onslaught against corruption by the Buhari administration, describing it as inevitable for national salvation. General Gowon, who stated this while speaking to newsmen after a closed-door meeting with President Buhari, also applauded government's effort at addressing the problems of insecurity and the economy.
One appreciate his effort and determination to rid the country of corruption, which certainly had been one of the problems that has created serious setback to the country, both nationally and internationally.
Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari has pledged that the anti-corruption crusade in the country will be deepened and institutionalized to last beyond the life of the current administration. Receiving American Secretary of State Mr. John Kerry at the State House, the president declared that his administration will insist on standards and strict compliance to lay down administrative and financial procedures in the public service. President Buhari appreciated the intervention of the U.S. before the 2015 polls when he demanded free and fair elections in Nigeria. On the Boko Haram insurgency, President Buhari thanked the U.S. for assistance in training and intelligence, which has made Boko Haram less of a threat to Nigeria and the Lake Chad Basin region. President Buhari said although militancy in the Niger Delta has impacted negatively on the economy and affected the positive intentions of international and local investors, government was showing restraints not to use real force except when constrained to do so. In his remarks, John Kerry commended the courage of President Buhari in fighting corruption, saying that corruption creates a ready-made playing field for recruiting extremists. The American Secretary of State also pledged his country's willingness to assist in tackling the humanitarian challenges in the Northeast. Also, the United States Secretary of State John Kerry has expressed the commitment of America and other world powers to collaborate with Nigeria in checking the violent extremism of Boko Haram, which he said is destroying various groups in the country. Mr. Kerry stated this when he paid a visit to the Sultan of Sokoto, Muhammad Sa'ad Abubakar III in Sokoto.
Or just creating fear. Fear instilled through repression invites not confidence, it invites contempt. It creates terrorists. Trust creates citizens.
This will further strengthen our resolve at all levels, from Mr. President down to the last administrator in this country.
The federal government has launched a revised edition of the National Counter-Terrorism Strategy. State House correspondent Jide Onifade reports that at the launch, President Buhari reiterated his commitment in the fight against terrorism, stating that terrorism is an act against humanity and the tenets of unity which the nation upholds.
The government is determined to ensure that the safety and security of every single Nigerian is a priority. This is why I have repeatedly ordered our law enforcement agents to ensure that perpetrators of violence in any shape or form are arrested and made to face the law. The activities of armed herdsmen and horse farmers, kidnappers, and criminal militants all threaten our peace and security and the stability of our nation. We will not allow anyone under any guise, whether it is politics, culture, or religion, to violate the physical person, lives or property of other citizens. This is the oath to which I swore, and I will uphold it at all costs.
We have worked assiduously with all stakeholders to re-articulate the roles of ministries, departments, and agencies and civil society.
And still on security, United Nations Assistant Secretary General has commended the federal government over progress made in keeping Bama town secure. Speaking on his recent visit to the Northeast, he called on the federal government to do more in other key towns of Adamawa, Borno, and Yobe states.
I want to see the World Bank, I want to see the United Nations Development Programme, I'd love to see the United Nations Environment Programme hand in hand with the Lake Chad Basin Commission, with the governments of Cameroon, Chad, Niger and Nigeria, addressing the root cause of the crisis, because otherwise all the hard work of the relief agencies will be a temporary solution.
The Special Advisor to the President on Social Investment, Mariam Uwais, says the federal government special intervention project has kicked off with 20 billion naira committed to it so far. National Assembly correspondent Ignatius Nkwo reports that she said this while briefing House of Representatives Joint Committee on Legislative Budget and Research and Poverty Alleviation.
We are planning to work in every community, and we are hoping that he will monitor and see that we're working in that community. We're asking to have community-based method, and you understand that.
How to coordinate this? That is why we are raising these issues here. The structure you are providing here should be different from the structure there, so that there will be strong oversight.
The federal government says it will sustain partnership with multinational and development agencies towards delivering on the power needs of Nigeria. Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Babatunde Raji Fashola, gave the assurance while inaugurating Phase 1 of a clean energy solar electricity generation system at the Lower Usuma Dam Water Treatment Plant in Abuja.
Between last year and now to put on the photovoltaic panels. We hope that some of these will ultimately be assembled in Nigeria so that we don't import them anymore. We're talking to a few people. So we expect to see more of this.
Improving core infrastructure is one of the priority areas of JICA programs in Nigeria.
FCT Minister Muhammad Musa Bello has inspected the abandoned Otako General Hospital and some waste transfer sections in the federal capital city. Shaibu Onoze Yakubu reports that the purpose is to get first-hand information on the yet-to-be-completed projects that is meant to transfer waste into wealth.
Water flowing in from the Otako village by the right-hand side here into the premises. So the experts in the relevant departments of the FCT will look at this matter very seriously so that all challenges that have bedeviled this site for a long time would be addressed, because as long as this hospital is not completed and functional, all the money spent all these years would have been of no benefit to the community.
And that wraps up the news. It's now back to Rhoda and Kingsley for the continuation of Good Morning Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much there, Larry Bala Hassan, for the news. We'll see you some other time. And now we'll take a short break. When we return, it will be time for our business segment.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Hey, I just had a shower, but why do I still feel so hot and sweaty?
Let me finish this and I will show you something surprising. Let's take a look. See, heat means sweat. Sweat brings germs. Dettol 100 times cool. It removes germs to leave you feeling clean, fresh, and 100 times cool. Beat the heat and germs with Dettol 100 times cool.
Dettol, endorsed by the Nigerian Medical Association.
Introducing Chief Eric Omofia, President CEO of Erisco Foods Limited.
Dear Nigerians, we are practical manufacturers determined to say the truth in the best interest of our country. And the truth is that only Nigerians can make Nigeria great. I urge you to practicalize your love for this country. Buy made in Nigerian products from today and build a much brighter future for our country. You cannot continue to promote only other countries' economies, create jobs and wealth for them while denying yourself and children job opportunities and a good economy by not patronizing your own made in Nigerian products like Erisco, Rigico, and Nagico tomato paste and other range of Erisco foods products. Do the wise thing. Buy made in Nigeria today. You will never regret it. Let us all contribute to develop Nigeria's economy and support President Buhari's economic policies so that Nigeria can be sweet for all of us. Thank you and God bless you.
Buy your own products. Buy made in Nigeria like Erisco, Richico, and Nagico range of products. Proudly made in Nigeria by Erisco Foods Limited, a member of Erisco Bumpet Group.
All right, now it's time for our business segment. Central Bank of Nigeria, we understand, has directed all forex dealers to begin allocation of 60% of their transacted foreign exchange to manufacturers. Our correspondent, Shehu Ogunloye, has details of this in our business package.
The Central Bank of Nigeria has signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Central Bank of Central African Republic, BIAC. Governor, Central Bank of Nigeria, and new chairman of the Association of African Central Banks, AACB, Godwin Emefiele, during an interview after the signing of the MOU, says the objective is to promote cross-border supervision in the area of banking, financial inclusion, and banking and payment across the two countries.
What we've just done is to sign a memorandum of understanding between the Central Bank of Nigeria and the BIAC, which is the Central Bank of the Central African Republic, basically on cross-border supervision in the area of banking supervision, in the area of financial inclusion, as well as in the area of improving banking and payments across our two countries. Well, you know, the truth is that as a result of this meeting, that the major part of the discussions and deliberations we had at this meeting between Wednesday and today basically is to see how we can foster African financial integration, to see to it that African central banks work together, cooperate together through the Association of African Central Bank, so that by being together and then forging a common purpose, you find out that the African Central Bank can be taken more seriously by the global community.
The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has directed all forex dealers, most of whom are deposit money banks, to begin the allocation of the 60% of their transacted foreign exchange to manufacturers. This is contained in a circular signed by W.D. Guthrie, Acting Director of the CBN Trade and Exchange Department. The Apex Bank said only 40% of transacted forex should go outside the manufacturing sector. The CBN also directed all authorized dealers to continue to publish weekly sales of foreign exchange to end users in national newspaper. The CBN's prohibition of forex sales to manufacturers importing 41 specific items listed by the bank still stands, as the bank has not lifted the prohibition. And that's the package on the business news for now. Thanks for watching.
All right, thank you, Shehu Ogunloye, there for that business package. Newspaper review is up next. All right, our newspaper reviewer is in the studio, Bayo Atoyibi. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. Always a pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you, Rhoda. Good morning. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, let's begin our review this morning with Vanguard. Vanguard has as its lead story, CBN suspends 9 banks from forex transactions. CBN suspends 9 banks from forex transactions. And then the photograph you see there, the photograph of the NLC demonstrating yesterday, saying the Nigeria Labour Congress rejects unpaid workers' benefits by state governments, and the killing of workers in Nasarawa State. Now, also there on the front page of Vanguard, above the name flag, we have world losing $2.6 trillion annually to corruption. And this is attributed to John Kerry, U.S. Secretary of State. And above that, also a story on the economy. CBN must review 41 items restricted from forex market. And this is according to the OPS, that's the organized private sector. Now, Buhari condemns Zamfara killings on Twitter. Details of that on page 11. Bayo on the killings on Twitter, or condemns via Twitter. Anyway, but it's a serious incident.
Modifier,
yeah, that's right. There's a dangly modifier. Buhari condemns Zamfara killings. That's in detail on page 11 of Vanguard. We need credible information to rescue Chibok girls. Again, that's according to the president. Details of that on page 8. And NAF raid kills Boko Haram commanders and Shekau wounded, attributed to the military. And Bayo, another follow-up story. Police discover graves in House of Prophet who chained 28 persons. This is in Lagos. Details of that can be found on page 7.
All right. right, on the Punch, just beside the nameplate, we have there, corruption costs global economy $2.6 trillion yearly. That's attributed to U.S. Secretary of State. And of course, 217 firms shut down in 1 year, says Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. That's on page 21. The big story on the Punch this morning: can cause emergency meeting over Zamfara Kaduna killings. With riders, no place for violence under my watch, says President Muhammadu Buhari. Act heinous, killers must be punished, says NAFSAT. And we see a picture story there. Libya repatriates 241 Nigerians to Lagos. That's on page 5 of the Punch. Just beside the picture story, 66-year-old man commits suicide over unpaid salaries. That's you can continue to read on page 4 and 5. On page 9, Lassa fever. Federal government identifies 59 contacts in Delta and Anambra. That's a development story. And of course, on page 10, Sage Committee invites Jibri over budget padding. All right, Bayo.
Yes, let's start with the story about the visiting Secretary of State, John Kerry. And he has described Nigeria as a regional leader in the fight against corruption, and that Nigeria is indeed a role model in the ongoing global effort at fighting corruption. The Secretary of State, who was in Sokoto, described corruption as dangerous and that it must be tamed. And that was why, Rhoda, you referred to the amount he mentioned, that corruption worldwide, the world loses 2.6 trillion annually to corruption. He acknowledged that the Buhari administration effort to entrench morality, transparency and honesty and good governance in public life is acknowledged. U.S. is fully committed to fighting corruption and will entrench good governance globally. He also identified the diversity of culture and religion, and especially that of tolerance, as a stronghold for Nigeria. Mr. Kerry hailed leaders of the Sokoto Caliphate, particularly the late Sir Ahmadu Bello, for the virtues of peace, unity, and tolerance. He commended the Sultan Saad Abubakar III for his effort for peace and his plan to establish an all-women university. The Sultan said Mr. Kerry's inspiring words will encourage a redoubling of effort. The governor of Sokoto, Aminu Waziri Tambuwal, also said we don't discriminate either on religion, on ethnicity, or political. All we do is that we accommodate all for peace. But that is one perspective. There is another perspective by another American. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump says November 8 election in America will be rigged. And he said, when he said that, President Obama said the statement was ridiculous. And he said, I wonder, has he heard about Nigeria before? It's one country with a robust history of election infraction. I have taken time to study Nigeria. I had two when I know that Obama is their second cousins. You know, Americans, Nigerians and Kenyans, they look alike. Look at them again. He has another take on journalists. He said, journalists are capable of anything. All journalists the world over are the same. They don't like Trump. If I have my way, I will import a Nigerian military law that says that jail for journalists who embarrass public officers. The man is living in the past. He's a loose cannon, as he's described as the most uncouth presidential candidate in recent American political history. Guess what? 41 top Republicans, among who are senators, House of Reps, governors, former Republican presidential candidates, and 50 senators, national security officers, say they won't vote Donald Trump in the November 8 election.
All right, Bayo,
two perspectives by two Americans on Nigeria.
That's right. Well, Bayo, we have discussed the forthcoming U.S. presidential election already, and of course there will be more opportunity for us to take a more in-depth look at Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. They are the two leading candidates. There are other candidates, of course, in the election, and the embarrassment that Donald Trump has caused both himself and the Republican Party is very well reported. Bayo, let's continue our review. Daily Trust newspaper below the name flag also has the story of the CBN barring 9 banks from forex transactions. By the way, this is over non-remittance of, alleged non-remittance of the monies held by those banks with regard to NNPC accounts into the TSA. Kwankwaso's office sealed over mass wedding. Details of that can be found on page 4. And what Kerry discussed with Buhari and 5 governors. That's the lead story with a double-decker. That's with a double-decker headline. Now, editor's choice. This is a bit worrisome. Shekau fatally wounded in airstrike, and this is attributed to the army. Well, if he was fatally wounded, that means he was killed. But the other report we got was... Yes, that's fatally wounded means he was killed. Well, the other reports indicate that, of course, he was injured. Now, 90% of Niger Delta projects abandoned. This is attributed to a committee, and details on page 7. And on page 3, Buhari and Atiku greet Sultan at 60.
And the New Telegraph leads with recession. Senators reps shun constituencies, says we are broke. Statement there credited to the Senate leader, and that's on page 2. Above the name flag, $2.1 billion NNPC funds, CBN bars 9 banks from Forex deal. And the picture story, of course, is that of the U.S. Secretary of State, the Sultan of Sokoto, Sahad Abubakar III, and, of course, the governor of, Sokoto, Kwankwaso. And below that, Kingsley read that earlier. It's also trending here on the New Telegraph. Military hits Shekau, kills Boko Haram commanders, and the NAF 300 terrorists killed in air raids.
Yes, the banks that have been barred from Forex are 8. So, some papers report 8, some report 9. But the total sum in between them is about $2.125 billion. And the highest among them refused to remit $530 million, while the lowest was $85 million. They have until when they remit before they will be admitted into the Forex transaction. There are 2 stories that have some conflicting reports. There is one about a supposed pastor who has also been described as a prophet, and he described himself as a herbalist, who his name is Emmanuel Adeyemi, from whose home they find 27 people chained. The latest report is that they found some graves too around his house, and they are associating it with ritualists. The Commissioner of Police for Lagos, Fatai Osheni, says that police raided the place on the tip-off that he traded in body parts to ritualists. The man says that he is a traditional healer and not a human parts seller. He claimed to have chained his son to cure him of his stealing habit. He said those he buried were patients who were brought almost dead from hospital and eventually died, and they were finally buried in the graves there. The other story is about the sealing of the home of Senator Rabiu Musa Kwankwaso. His home is very close to the government house. He was planning a mass wedding for 4,395 prospective couples, and the Kano State government also was planning a program for enforcement program. So police, fearing that there will be a clash between Al-Qaeda and Amana, the political conflict in Kano, sealed up the place for peace, and I think peace is now reigning there.
All right, Baya Toebe, that's the much we can take, but for viewers who are interested, there's a story on page 20 of Daily Trust. It's from the stories from the Philippines. It says 1,900 killed amid crackdown on drugs. The new president of the Philippines is leading the charge in this regard. You know, vigilante groups and all sorts, government forces are whacking the heads of drug dealers. 1,900. And Baya, of course, that's the story we'll keep an eye on.
Yes.
In the coming days and weeks. Baya Toebe, I'd like to thank you for being with us this morning. See you again tomorrow.
Thank you, as always.
All right, we'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be dealing with our principal item for discussion this morning. That's PPP, Public-Private Partnership and Infrastructure Delivery.
Nigerians. Suicide bombers are not spirits. They are not ghosts. They are human beings like you and me. They live amongst us. They are your neighbors. They are your friends today, but terrorists tomorrow. So you must know your neighbor now. Security begins with you and me. Know your neighbor. Be vigilant. Be security conscious. Report suspicious persons, objects, and movements to the police and other security agencies. The security of our nation is a duty for you and me.
If you see something, say something. Nigeria, unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
A hectic lifestyle or overeating can cause a burning pain in your chest. That's hunger. Take Gaviscon. One dose relieves in 3 minutes to soothe the pain of heartburn. It goes straight to the source to work for hours, providing long-lasting relief.
That's why I recommend Gaviscon.
I recommend Gaviscon. Gaviscon, fast relief you can actually feel.
If symptoms persist after 3 days, consult your doctor.
Happy Hour, burst of refreshment. Available in peach, tropical fruit, apple peach pear, kiwi mint lime, and guava. Chi Happy Hour, burst of refreshment.
House of Chi.
Do you know that 2.5 million children in Nigeria are malnourished, and about 500,000 are likely to die yearly if nothing is done? To combat this public health emergency, Her Excellency Aisha Muhammad Buhari initiated Get Involved, a component of a Future Assured project to fight malnutrition in children, especially those at the internally displaced people's camp. The launch of the Get Involved project is an opportunity for all well-meaning Nigerians from all walks of life to lend their support to this noble cause. The pre-launch of Get Involved project is from 29th August to 2nd September 2016. Time, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. daily. Venue, International Conference Center, Abuja. Launching holds on Saturday, 3rd of September 2016. Time, 10 a.m. Venue, International Conference Center, Abuja. For more details, email programs@futureassured.org.ng. Get involved and save the life of a Nigerian child today.
All right, you're welcome back, but if you just joined us, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We are reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, governments around the world, particularly in developing countries, have come to the realization that it's nearly impossible for them to bear the burden of providing infrastructure and services for their citizens. Now, prior to the establishment of the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission by the federal government in 2005, there were several efforts by government at all levels to engage the private sector in meeting the infrastructure gap in the country. Now, in readiness for our discussion this morning, our correspondent, Makut Simon Machan, has this background report on what is generally referred to as the PPP, that's the Public-Private Partnership in Infrastructure Delivery.
Traditionally, governments around the world consider it their primary responsibility to not only make policies but also provide basic infrastructure and services for their citizens. Nigeria had been on this line of thinking for a long time, where it established public agencies to provide infrastructure and services to citizens. This ranged from roads and transportation through telecommunications and media to power, education, health, and agriculture, among others. But like many countries that realize the unsustainability of government's role as the sole provider of public infrastructure and services, Nigeria was soon to realize this fact when most of the public corporations were not only mismanaged but had become a conduit pipe for waste of taxpayers' money while giving the citizens little or no value. The Obasanjo administration woke up to the importance of public-private partnerships in financing, management, and maintenance of some public enterprises as a way of making them more viable and effective. This was to be further strengthened with the establishment of the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission by the Yar'Adua administration in 2009, in line with the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Act of 2005. This led to the blending of resources and assets from both public and private sectors with an objective of providing a more efficient and cost-effective means of infrastructure and service delivery, much more than achieved in traditional direct public delivery. Thus, there have been many partnerships under various concession agreement models, including infrastructure financing, design, build, operate and transfer, build, own, operate and transfer, rehabilitate, operate and transfer, joint development agreement, operation and maintenance, management contract and leasing. So far, at the federal level, the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission has over 47 projects under the public-private partnership cutting across many sectors of the economy. As anticipated, such agreements have been credited with the revival of some public agencies that were on their way to extinction, while others have been repositioned for better service to Nigerians. However, there are many challenges with the public-private partnership operations in Nigeria. This includes non-availability of long-term financing for investors, lack of due diligence on some PPP projects and agreements, lack of capacity of some private sector partners to deliver, as well as corruption, insecurity, political interference, and some legal tussles emanating from such partnerships. Besides, a school of thought says the private sector is profit-oriented and thus always focused on how much it can make from the partnership, sometimes to the detriment of the public. In spite of such reservations, the PPP initiative appears to have come to stay, particularly when Nigeria currently groans under a huge infrastructure deficit and an economy in recession. Experts believe that if PPPs are handled well, the public will get value for money while projects will be delivered quicker. PPPs can also stimulate private sector growth, facilitate risk transfer, open up access to international capital, and even provide political mileage for governments that utilize them well to fulfill campaign promises.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. And our focus this morning is on the public-private partnership in Nigeria towards a service and infrastructure delivery. And we're now being joined in our studios to discuss this issue as Senator Ben Maribruce, the chairman, Senate Committee on Privatization, of course, a former Director General of the Nigerian Television Authority. Welcome home. Good to have you join us.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
And also joining us in this discussion this morning is the Director General of the Infrastructural Concession Regulatory Commission, ICRC. He is Aminu Diko. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, and thank you for having me as well.
All right, we also have two guests joining us from our Lagos Network Center. First, we'd like to welcome the Managing Director and CEO of Harith Infrastructure Investment, Mr. Okpuyo Ofori-Okuma. Mr. Ofori-Okuma, it's our pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning. Thanks for having me today.
And then also with him there at the Lagos Network Center is Dr. Elemen Ikpefan. He's an Associate Professor of Finance at Covenant University, that's in Ota, Ogun State. Dr. Ikpefan, a pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me this morning.
All right, gentlemen, once again, we welcome you to the program. You listened to the background report by our correspondent, Makul Simon Macham, and it was reeling off some of the arrangements that we always heard about in the past: build, operate, and transfer, contractor finance. But the buzz is PPP, that's the public-private partnership. What exactly does it entail? Is it similar to privatization, to commercialization, to concession, or what is it? Let's begin with Aminu Diko, the Director General of ICRC, standing for the Infrastructure Concession and Regulatory Commission.
Well, thank you very much. And I must say the reports we had earlier was very detailed. And for all intents and purposes, we could say we can rest our oars on that and just go home, because it was quite explicit and detailed. But having said that, I'd like to clarify this position clearly. It's a misconception in the country and around that PPPs are the same thing as privatization. They're not. Now, there are three forms of procurement, One we know is the traditional procurement, where government gets money from sales of crude oil and other resources, shares it among the various tiers of government, and ministries get it and decides to grant contract to deliver services to Nigerians. And the second point, when you talk about privatization, government owns entities or assets which over time have been used to deliver services, but because of certain inadequacies, perhaps because of the enormous money that's been spent in dealing with those assets, government decided it's no longer worthwhile to maintain them. So it decided to just sell them completely. That's privatizing them. They never come back to government. But when we talk about PPP, we're talking about a relationship between the government and the private sector, where they both combine their resources and also share risk in delivering infrastructure which otherwise would have been delivered by government itself. Traditionally, these assets come back to the government. So it never goes away completely, it's not sold. The private sector brings in money and expertise and deploys it to deliver the infrastructure and recoups the investment over a number of years that will be agreed between the public and the private sector. It adds value to the infrastructure, it maintains it for a reasonable number of time under defined performance indicators called KPIs. So that essentially is what the difference is. I see a lot of publications in the newspaper were selling assets. No, under PPPs, we're not selling any asset.
All right, on that, let's thank Umar Diko. Well, of course, the late Alhaji Umar Diko was Second Republic Minister of Agric, very powerful. That Shehu Shagari is late now. Yes. So rest in peace. But the guest with us in the studio is Aminu Diko. I don't know whether there's any relationship, by the way, but we'll discuss that later in the course of the program. But let's quickly go to Lagos before we come back here to Abuja. Mr. Ofori Okuma, you listened to the explanation provided by the DG of ICRC. Now, what's your take on this in terms of the various forms of PPP that are available, and why, of course, do you have to have PPPs?
All right. Firstly, I'd say that I fully endorse what Aminu said. I think he's given a very succinct explanation of the differences between privatization on the other hand and then PPPs. If I can add maybe an additional synopsis, what I would point out to you is that the key things that distinguish them are, on the one hand, ownership, and the other is the allocation of risks. In the privatization model, as Aminu explained, when you do sell an asset, you transfer the ownership from the state to the new buyer, usually in the private sector. But with the public-private partnership, the ownership still does remain with the government, but then risks are shared and allocated between the public and the private sectors in line with who is best placed to manage them. Of course, there are different models, and the critical thing is choosing the model that works best for you. In some cases, it's important to recognize that the private investor will not necessarily jump in and take all the risks with a project. You might find, say, in very capital-intensive infrastructure projects like rail, the private sector may not be able to finance every single aspect of that rail, from tracks, stations, signals, through to rolling stock. And with examples like the Gautrain in South Africa, where government covered about 80% of the cost, you might find that there's a larger burden on the state. If you look at a road, on the other hand, a toll road, again, it depends on the model. I mean, you can have a model where an existing road which has been built to certain required standards is then concessioned over to a private investor. And all the investor has to focus on doing is maintaining that road, collecting the revenues, which incidentally will be lower because the capital cost or the operating cost is commensurately lower than, say, in a situation where the private investor either has to build the entire road from scratch or picks up a very, very badly deteriorated road and has to put in a lot of capital in it. So there are different ranges from full capital expenditure right to simply operating and maintaining that. But in either which way, the private sector's involvement, aside from providing financing as well as operating and maintaining, will be on the basis that that private investor expects to make a return. If the investor cannot make a return, if the investor is being asked to do things that the investor either isn't able to or doesn't believe that they're best placed to handle, then the likelihood is that they'll be disinterested to be part of that. And we need to bear all of this in mind when we talk about public-private partnerships.
Thank you very much, Mr. Okbuyo Oforio Kuma in our Lagos Network Center. We'll get back to you in the course of the discussion. But Senator Ben Maribuz, you are a big player also in the private sector. For better understanding how important is public-private partnership, and also let's look at the successes we have also recorded in private partnership, public-private partnership in Nigeria.
Well, thank you very much. I think Mr. Diko here, Raji Diko, explained it very, very well. The biggest problem we have is, do you trust the government to honor the terms of the agreement? When you go into these agreements, are they agreements you intend to honor? Are they agreements that are badly put together? And if you don't honor, let's give a typical story. Let's talk about Virgin Atlantic. Virgin Atlantic flying Murtala Mohammed Airport. Then you had a deal with Virgin Nigeria to fly from the same airport so they can connect their passengers. So Richard Branson, a popular, powerful, global player, comes to Nigeria and they structure a deal. There's a change of government. Then you tell them Virgin Nigeria should move from Murtala Mohammed to MM2. Okay? Which means if you land domestic, you take a bus to Murtala Mohammed and you connect. He gets pissed off, he leaves Nigeria, he goes abroad, he calls a press conference and says, I will never do business in Nigeria. Do we need a deal like that? Let's assume we signed a bad deal. For the sake of argument, let's say we signed a bad deal, but we signed a deal. If we signed a bad deal, should we not honor that deal? Take MM2. Why are we having a problem with MM2? MM2 is a successful airport. It functions, it provides a service. Why are we having litigation at MM2? Take the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. What is the problem with that project? Why do we have a problem with that project? Take the Lagos-Ekpe Expressway. Why is that a success? As long as we have more failures than success, or failures that are highlighted more than the success we have, we frighten people from going into this business. We don't need it. If you sign a bad deal, honor the deal. As long as we have failures and we keep reporting failures, we have a problem of perception. And the problem of perception becomes reality because then people are scared to go into this business or shady characters get into it. Take the power sector, okay? Take the power sector. Privatized. We still have no light. Did they check if these guys had the capability to do what they said they were going to do? Did they have deep pockets? Did they have the technical know-how? We're going to call a public hearing on the power sector very soon, and we're going to get all the GenCos and the DISCos to come talk to us and tell us what the problem is. If the process was successfully done, why do we not have any light? And if it was successfully done, why do you have a 100% increase? If you have a 100% increase in tariffs and salaries have not gone up by 1%, who's going to pay for the increase? What is the logic behind signing a deal where you have a 100% increase for a poor country where people are dying of poverty and starvation, and then you say you're going to have a 100% increase in power? I can't remember any time we've increased salaries in Nigeria in the last 1 year. Is that a fair deal? So do you structure a deal to impoverish Nigerians, to make us suffer, where inflation is going to be at 100% because everything is going up by at least 100%? Okay, so we have these problems, and these are the issues we should tackle. We've gone beyond definition. Let's deal with the issues. Why are we having these problems?
All right, distinguished Senator Ben Maribuz, thank you very much for the perspective. Of course, the other guests are listening to him. What Senator Maribuz has also indicated in summary, of course, I'm sure, as I said, you'll listen to him, the sanctity of contract. And contract is the foundation of PPPs. Let's go over now to Dr. Ailemen Ikpefan. You've also written about these challenges confronting PPP transactions in Nigeria. In addition to the violation of the sanctity of contracts, what in your opinion are the other pitfalls of PPPs as currently practiced in Nigeria, whether at the state or federal level?
Thank you for having me again. Now I want to buy into the argument of Ben Bruce, but I want to add to the financial aspect of it. Now the funding problem, funding challenge has been an issue in PPP development. Most of the loans that are given out for PPP projects have been at high interest rate. And the cause of PPP is value for money. where there is no value for money, efficient delivery of services, and it does not work in public interest, then it is counterproductive to the masses. When you look at the energy sector now, we find that there is duplication of taxes, which is contrary to what the stakeholders expect from PP projects. If you look at what we are going through, we are passing through recession. And as it is now, it might be difficult to accomplish the goal of Vision 2020, which is to emerge as one of the fastest growing economy at that 2020, and to become a big economy in Africa. So what we need to do now is to involve multilateral agencies, bilateral agencies, that will be able to guarantee loans in the PPP project. Without that, we may not be able to mobilize funds to execute most of these projects. We may have abandoned projects. Because if you look at the present trend now, we have inflationary trend, we have high interest rates. Where will the fund come from? The funding of the project, where will it come from? It will not come from the banks. The banks are having challenges now. They are undercapitalized at the moment because of the high interest rates and the operational cost. So what we need to do now is to engage the multilateral agencies and bilateral agencies to help guarantee loans given to the PPP project. Besides that, we need to also involve international institutions to help drive the PPP project. Besides that, the capital market at the moment now is not well capitalized. We are going through a bearish season now. There is low in the market. So how would they mobilize money from the capital market? Because you need funding from the capital market to be able to actualize the PPP project. I think I stop there for the moment.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Elemen Ikpefen and our Lagos Network Center. We'll get back to you also in the course of the discussion. But Aminu Diko, with all of these challenges now, as we begin to deal with the challenges, from your perspective, do you think that the ICRC Act of the 2005 has the proper legal framework to back the PPP?
The answer is no. And that is why since 2011, the board of ICRC authorized the amendment of the ICRC Act. And currently, the bill is in the National Assembly. And the intention is to give the Commission more teeth to discharge its function. We have provisions in the Commission and the Act which provides that we must ensure that there is complete compliance with the terms and conditions of the contract. There's compliance with the acts regarding procurement options. There's also the need for us to ensure that people who are in charge of procurement carry that exercise transparently. Now, bid rigging and all this malpractice surrounding procurements are one of the things that give bad image to a country when it comes to procuring private sector investment. My colleagues were talking about bringing international institutions to participate in it. They will not come unless they see a clear regulatory framework and then a clear institutional framework. As you have laws that are good enough to discharge the functions. And you also have institutions that are correctly empowered to discharge the responsibilities. Then there are other problems. Capacity building. In most of our public institutions, like I've just explained and you heard from other speakers, people don't have a clear idea of what PPPs entail. Most people think it's just privatization and selling of assets. Now, it goes from the grassroots right down to the top level of government. We need to correct that impression quickly and steadfastly. I read editorial yesterday, newspaper editorials, editors saying privatization, concession are the same thing. If we don't change this mindset, we're not going to make significant progress. PPPs are very complex because when you are trying to deliver infrastructure using other people's money, other people's expertise. They will be guided by what best will protect their interest before they can venture to invest their capital. Based on a World Bank study that has been just released, one of the critical factors investors look at before they put in their capital in any jurisdiction is the ability to take that money out, or ability to protect the investment, as well as the expertise that is going to accompany the investments. And that's why the insecurity in the country also impacts significantly on our ability to attract investors currently. It's true, we are getting the responses from investors, but it's a trickle from what we could have if the environment was much, much friendlier. Now, even among ourselves, we worry about where we want to go. Kaduna crisis, Southern Nigeria crisis, Middle Belt crisis. So you find that then the investments will be restricted to a certain part of the country that is known to be relatively free of this significant risk. Like Opio said, PPP is about risk and sharing them. You have to share the risk between the public and the private. The private sector is not going to absorb all the risk that we put forward in a PPP project. They can only absorb the risk that they are best able to manage. Risks like government issues, law, security, those are not risks the private sector wants to contend with. We had visiting investors one time who came to the country, and we had to get police protection for them to go and see the facilities that they were talking about getting them to invest. By the time they left, what they said, Mr. DG, we were not accustomed to investing where we had guns behind our backs. We'd like to come back when things are a bit better.
All right, Mr. Diko, thank you very much. Let's get the views now of Senator Ben Murray Bruce. Senator Bruce, you already touched on the aspect relating to the lack of respect for the sanctity of contracts, and you cited a few examples. Now, these are some of the examples that are very prominent, if you like, in the popular imagination. People think of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, the second Niger Bridge. It's also there. You talk about port concessioning. On the face of it, nothing appears to be working. Today you said, oh, this PPP is going on with this one. Tomorrow the matter is in court. Another headline tells you, no, we are remobilizing them to site. Money has been released. ICROC has given its approval, no objection. What exactly do we make of all of this? Now, do we understand, how to get along with bridging the infrastructure deficit using the modality of PPPs?
There has to be discipline, and there has to be order, and there has to be authority. Enough of this nonsense. If Nigeria is to develop like China or like Japan, there has to be order and there has to be discipline. And the leader must say, stop all of this nonsense, honor your agreements, honor your contracts, and let's develop Nigeria. You can't, look, I have a very good friend, Don Cornelius, Soul Train. One day I was talking to him. He said, Ben, let me tell you something. You can't have to make a movie. You either make the movie or you don't make the movie. In this case, we're not making the movie. That is the problem we have right now. We have to have order. We have to honor the agreement. If you have an agreement with the Bicottony for Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, honor the agreement, give them a timeline. If in 2 years, I'm just looking at the act for the first time, when we get National Assembly, let me know what you want to do to modify it, and I'll push it, and I'll push it myself. Look, we say we'll give you 2 years. If you don't honor it in 2 years, we cancel the agreement. But Lagos-Ibadan Expressway has been on for about 10 years. Nothing is happening. Once you change the government from Obasanjo to Yaradua, then everybody change attitude. You can't do that. Government is a continuum. You must have a 20-year development plan. He raised a very fundamental issue, the issue of security. One day, I was at a tourism conference, and I said I wanted to go to a certain part of the country. And the guy said, okay, no problem. He'll get me armed guards and mobile policemen. I said, look, you can't promote tourism with armed guards and mobile policemen. And he's right. If an investor is going to go to a part of the country and he has to be protected, how can you talk about it? If a minister goes around with escort drivers and mobile policemen, how do you think we look? We look ridiculous. When Goodluck was president one time, I said to him at a public forum, I said, why do you have a policeman standing behind your back? He thought about it. He said, you're right. Why is the policeman standing? It goes back from colonial era. Why does a minister stand or a commissioner stand and you see a policeman with a gun standing behind you? First of all, you may think you're cute, but what you've done is you've scared people away. You don't need a policeman to stand behind you. You don't need to go to a part of Nigeria with a policeman standing beside you with a gun. All those things frighten investors. So we need to change our mindset. We need to honor contracts. People forget that Federal Palace Hotel used to be a federal government hotel. It was sold. People forget that Hilton and Sheraton used to belong to government, and they were sold. But what we did to Richard Branson was terrible. Good or bad, it was unnecessary. Murtala Mohammed too. Why are we in court? First of all, I got a letter from Union, from FAN, and they said they don't want to concession the airport. Why would you not want to concession the airport? What sense does it make for government? First of all, there are certain talents government staff do not possess. Private sector initiative. Why would you want to run airport? If the airport was so fantastic, why would anybody want to concession it in the first place? If they concession airports in Europe and America and all over the world, why would you want to concession your airports in Nigeria? You must have the intention. You must be willing to honor the agreement. I must be willing. There are investors who are willing to invest in Nigeria. But let us regulate. Let us look at the act. Let us see where the loopholes are. Let us fix it. And let us industrialize Nigeria. 70% of the budget in Nigeria is spent on recurrent expenditure. So first of all, you don't have the money. You don't have the money. With a fall in revenue, you don't even have the money to pay salaries. So what sense does it make for the government to get involved in projects they cannot fund, they cannot maintain? And let me give you a typical example. We looked at the budget of BPE. I'm chairman of privatization. They brought the budget. They had a budget to pay salaries, but no capital projects, no budget to supervise companies that have been privatized. So what is the purpose of setting up BPE? This is what I've just said. They had no money to supervise, to make sure the power sector that had been privatized are monitored to make sure they comply with the reasons why they were privatized in the first place.
In terms of privatization.
They brought a budget for National Orientation Agency, only for salaries. So let us say, the president now says, let us have a campaign on war against indiscipline. Where is the money to fund that campaign? Which is very important. Or war against corruption. But you have money for salaries. So all we do in Nigeria is pay salaries. So yes, he is a very, very important man in this country. He needs to ensure that we proceed with the process, but we give him the power he needs, the regulation he requires to make sure he does a fantastic job and we industrialize Nigeria. There is no shortcut to doing it.
All right, Senator Bruce, thank you very much. That will appear to be at the federal level. The impression, gentlemen, both at our Lagos Network Center and here, it's not being created that there is an omnibus piece of legislation that governs infrastructure concession or PPP arrangements at local, state, and federal level. So let's go back to Mr. Ofori Okuma. Mr. Ofori Okuma, you've listened to the comments of the other guests with respect to challenges, and yours, of course, is an infrastructure investment. What other peculiar challenges, has your firm encountered in this process, and how do you think we might begin to overcome some of these issues? Taking that along with the fact that are there differences, for instance, in the experience between PPPs at the federal level and at the state level?
All right, I think before getting into trying to distinguish between PPPs at federal and state level, I should share, some research information. In looking at emerging markets around the world, what practitioners have identified, including investors, etc., as the key risks that concern them about emerging markets, of which Nigeria is one, happens to be political and regulatory risks. This is very important. And look, as somebody who's been an investor and served different roles in infrastructure over the last 28 years, I can tell you that, I really appreciate the very down-to-earth and blunt style of the distinguished Senator Ben Murray Bruce. Because let me be frank with you, I mean, when you look at it from a strictly documentary technical perspective, yes, let's have laws in place, let's have regulators in place, even let's have lots of money in place. But I tell you this, what actually makes these projects work or not work, what matters to investors like ourselves, is not just so much the words that are spoken, but the actions. There's that popular saying, actions speak louder than words. And the crux of confidence building is when, as an investor, we see what the government policy is, we see what the frameworks are, and then we actually see the actions and the behaviors that support that. So when the distinguished senator asks questions like, why, for example, isn't there sanctity of contract? That's important because what it means to an investor like my organization is that you've probably committed a lot of money by this time,
and then something happens. It could be a discontinuity from one administration to another administration, and all of a sudden, you know, somebody's telling you stories. And going back to Aminu's point, it's about risk. The risk that your expectations do not come to fruition. And the moment that that risk is considered unmanageable, maybe unidentifiable, at some point in time, you may get to the stage where your environment is no longer attractive. Now, as whether or not PPPs differ between the federal and the states, the first thing I have to say is that the PPP model is universal. You can apply it at any level in any country in the world if the right conditions exist. Now, you did mention earlier on that the ICRC Act is not an omnibus piece of legislation, and that is true. It focuses principally on federal government projects and any other projects, so it could be at the state level, where the federal government may have a contingent liability, for example, by virtue of posting a guarantee at sovereign level. So therefore, what it means is at state level, and if you look at, say, in the road sector, of the total housing stock that we have in the country, only about 20% actually are federal roads, when another 20% or so being state roads, and the vast majority happens to be local governments. Now, I'm not getting into the issue about political structuring, but typically what we find is that obviously local governments are somehow subsumed within the state government level. So if you want to do PPPs at state level, you need to have the legislation, the regulatory framework, and other resources to make that possible. There's also, when you look at it again from a constitutional standpoint, things that are on the exclusive list as distinct from the concurrent list. And all of these things have a bearing. So we need to get the structure right. We need to sort things right. And if I dare say in a very careful way, we must also endeavor to depoliticize infrastructure, because that's, again, one of the key risks that investors see in emerging markets. So we do need to keep asking the questions why. I mean, what's happened with Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, MMA2, Lekki-Ekpe Expressway, which incidentally I was involved in. But I can tell you this, at the same time, I'm pleased to report to you that there is money coming into this country. We closed a major IPP in December last year that brought about $900 million into the country. It's the Azure Edo IPP. And that particular project is right now ahead of construction program, and it's doing quite well. And in the clip that introduced this particular program, you showed, for example, the Honorable Minister of Power, Works and Housing, commissioning a solar plant at a treatment plant. Right now, the NBET has signed PPAs that should hopefully bring about 1,125 megawatts of power into the country. There are challenges, I dare say, but what I'm saying is that there is the interest to bring capital into this country. So I think we should spend a bit more time as well focusing on what are the challenges in actually getting that capital in. And I think the only way we're going to do that is in exactly the way the distinguished senator is approaching it. Look at it bluntly, frankly, and honestly, and then deal with those problems to ensure the actions match up with the words.
All right, Mr. Ofori Okuba, thank you very much. Also, Dr. Aileme Ikpefan at our Lagos Network Center. Gentlemen, as well as Senator Bruce and Mr. Diko here with us at the Lagos Network Center. We're taking a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with aspects of the conversation.
Every goal, every success deserves your all. Only 100% will do. Chivita, 100%. Chivita 100% juice. Made from real natural fruits. With no preservative and no added sugar. The best always believes in 100%.
Chivita, 100% or nothing.
Oh, my Cinderella, where goeth thou?
Oh, me goeth there, but thou must wait here.
Obsolete, superannuated, anti-deliverance, how could you? All these courses are for me. What did I do?
Well, listen, he's not cursing you. He's speaking English.
This week on your award-winning comedy series, Professor John Boog, starring Kanayo Okanayo, Mercy Johnson, Queen Wokoye, Funky Malam, Bimbo Akintola, Oguz Baba, Ime Bishop, Yomi Fash Lanso, MC For God, Stephen Odingbe, Junior Pope.
And took to his heels.
Special guest appearances by Mama G and Sunny Danger.
You see, it's not like that. I'm trying to
I want you to be my Nigerian wife.
Professor John Bull, fasten your seatbelts this Tuesday and Friday, 8:30 to 9 p.m. on NTA Network, International, and Star Times. It's absolutely bombastic.
Over and
The largest data network, Glow, grandmasters of data.
We intend to radically change Newman Street. My company has a track record of converting slums into new cities. Many years of experience has taught us to fish out allies within the communities we want to transform.
Don't listen to your husband. Listen to me. Give me a boy. And the two of you may never even have to work again.
Yeah, sharp guy, how are you? What's your name?
Akpos. America.
Oh, Akpos America.
Yeah, one, not be two.
Wonderful wonder! Wonderful wonder!
Wonderful.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Of course, we still have our guests at the Lagos Network Center as well as our guests here with us in the Abuja studios. Now, let's come back to Aminu Duko, DG ICRC. Rhoda?
All right, let's look at it this way. Let's back it up a little bit. Let's look at, on your website, you have a list of PPPs ongoing. Let's, I would like you to itemize some of them for us, and let's talk about how far they've gone, which ones are succeeding, which ones are not succeeding.
Well, under our Act, every ministry is required to indicate to ICRC the number of PP projects it has identified and wants to prosecute in the budget year. And we also are in turn required to advertise all those projects so that investors can begin to prepare to bid for them when the time comes. Now, so the list can come 40 or 50 from ministries, but that is just indicative. Now, there are processes in bringing projects to the market. They start with identifying the projects, then you develop them. Now, the private sector is not going to bring money and say, okay, go and develop this project to see whether it's going to be profitable or not. That is traditionally the government's responsibility. When you have baked it to a certain level, then you can now give it to him and say, okay, this is what we have, and we think it's going to be bankable. So people will be invited to indicate interest whether they want to bid in it or not. Now, a number of projects we've had from the ministries came and we've assessed them, and the ministries are supposed to develop those projects to a certain level where the private sector will be interested in bidding. But what we've talked about, the lack of funding to the ministries becomes a problem in developing those projects because they require huge capital. You require expertise of consultants to go and do a lot of work. You're talking about rail, for instance. If you're talking about granting a concession of rail from Lagos to Kano, a transaction advisor who is called a consultant will need to traverse the entire route to check the integrity of the existing rail, if it's an existing rail, or if it's a new line, to check through all the routes that you envisage. It requires money because it's going to deploy a number of people, technology, equipment, and the works. So out of those projects, a number of them are still sitting as identified projects, but they haven't moved an inch. But the ones that we are happy to know that that are moving further are probably the railway concession. You may have noticed that the Vice President has set up a steering committee to push that project. The Minister of Transportation is in charge of that committee. So a lot of work has been going on that, and we hope that this will come to fruition very soon. In Lagos, we have the National Theatre project. We all know the National Theatre. It's a national icon. It's been there for the last 40 years, sitting as it is without any development or improvement. It has the capacity, 5,000 capacity hall inside that theatre, but nobody goes there. People go to Eco Holiday Inn or Federal Palace because it's private sector driven, so it's properly maintained. But if you go to National Theatre, the ACs don't work, the chairs don't work, the projectors don't work, so nobody goes. Now, the essence is that it's sitting on a large expanse of land, which the private sector can then develop into hotels, office blocks, resorts, and we've gone far on that. A preferred bidder has emerged, and hopefully, if the Ministry of Information is able to take that project to Federal Executive Council for approval, work can start. But then I will tell you, already there's litigation on the project. Some other company has gone to court challenging that exercise.
Well, Mr. Diko, you've just mentioned one example. That's the National Arts Theatre, which, of course, sometimes commentators say is an embarrassment to the country, the fact that it's not been very well utilized. What other PPPs are ongoing that you can say, look, these are success stories? So that either a viewer who is out there watching this program will say, oh, this is a PPP actually working. Because the challenges that we have identified, whether Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, controversy over MM2, or Second Niger Bridge, for instance. Second Niger Bridge is critical. We had here in the studios some months ago, the DG at the time, or the CEO at the time, of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and he was talking about the financing options that they had not closed the deal at the time. One doesn't know now whether indeed the PPP is off on the Second Niger Bridge, and as I've just asked, what else can you point to as ongoing PPPs under your watch?
All these projects are ongoing. Like you said, this MD of Sovereign Wealth told you, because they're complex, they need time to mature. But the only one that we can say is really running now is what the Senator alluded to, the Murtala Mohammed Domestic Airport in Lagos. That was built from scratch by a private sector concessionaire and is operational. Now, that also is entangled in litigation.
Why? Why are you in court?
No, fund is in court with Courtney.
Why?
Because of three things. Now, there was an agreement.
I'm taking over the interview. I want to know why.
I'm taking about the conversation.
Yeah.
Three issues. The agreement provides that from the date of the contract, fund cannot operate any terminal around that terminal without giving Courtney the first right of refusal.
Okay.
Secondly, it says that if Courtney, that the agreement, the concession period is supposed to be 36 years, but fund was disputing that.
After they signed the agreement?
After they signed the agreement. We tried so much to broker peace between the two agencies, and there was considerable inroad into that until one minister said he wasn't interested in the process. But last week, we had a meeting with the current Minister of State Aviation, and he was quite willing to listen to the issues. And he did say that if this was based on an agreement, there's no reason why parties cannot sit and determine the best way out. Because private people do not want their disputes taken to court. Nobody wants to go and collect damages in court. He wants to have a list of projects that he has succeeded in structuring and implementing. That's the portfolio that he's going to be bragging about, not how much money he has collected from one party as a default for violating the contract.
Okay, don't want to react.
Of course I want to react.
All right, as you react to that, doesn't that bring us to the beginning, the bidding process? Doesn't that, question the process?
The question I've said is, if you sign a bad agreement, honor the bad agreement. FAN is an agency under the Ministry of Aviation. Am I correct? Yes. So the minister should say, FAN, you have no right to do this. We've signed an agreement, honor the agreement. Why should FAN get up and say, okay, by Courtney, I disagree with terms of this agreement? You don't have any right to do that. Why should we tolerate that? That is the problem. Because you give the process a bad name. You give the process a bad name. And we are very self-serving. Let me tell you a story. In 1985, the Minister of Information and Culture was Emeka Omerwa. He set up a committee, and I was a member of the committee, look at the National Theatre Film Corporation. So I went to the Film Corporation. We got there. Just listen to this. We got to the Film Corporation. On the floor, I saw tapes. And I said, what are these tapes on the floor? He said, oh, these are, you know, in those days, television was only 6 hours a day. And if you wanted to know what was happening in the country, you had a Film Corporation videotape the president as he traveled across the world. And before the movie starts at Metro or Roxy, you would watch the history of Nigeria there. That's how we got information on the Civil War and about Nigeria. Now, they had recorded General Buhari's presidency. Babangida was now president of Nigeria. So I saw the tapes on. I said, what are you saying? He said, oh, this is the tapes of General Buhari. I said, what are you going to say? He's not going to edit it. I said, why? He said, Buhari is no longer president. I said, well, that's the history of Nigeria. He said, no, he's not going to touch it. I said, did anybody tell you? He said, no, but there's a new president now. This one is the old president. We're not going to touch it. Those tapes are now destroyed. The entire presidency of Buhari, which is a historical document, does not exist. I ask you, can anybody show me the 2 years presidency of President Buhari? It's gone. Because that individual with short knicker in those days refused to, the minister did not tell him not to edit those tapes. He destroyed the tapes. Because he destroyed the tapes, the presidency of General Buhari does not exist. That type of person, why should that person be in government? Now you have, by Courtney, who have done a deal with the government, and somebody in FAN says, I'm going to change the terms of the agreement after the guy has spent billions of naira building MM2. And we are listening to those guys. Why should we listen to them in the first place? How can you run a country? Remember what I said earlier. There must be order and there must be authority. And we cannot tolerate this anymore. Well,
distinguished Senator, thank you very much. You touched on this point. We're sure that the other guests will also have their perspectives. I mean, if a contract is bad, you say, look, go ahead regardless to enforce the terms of the contract. But the point is noted. Let's go over now to Dr. Aileman Ikpefam at our Lagos Network Studios. Again, financing. Ultimately, as you know, as the guests have indicated, this is about risk bearing and the extent of your risk, together with, of course, the financing that you are having to bring into all of this transaction. Earlier, you talked about, look, having to focus on bilateral and multilateral sources of funding. What, in your opinion, is wrong with seeking first domestic resources to bridge the funding gap that the private sector participant may have in a PPP arrangement?
Now, the problem of bridging the financing infrastructure gap is having challenge in Nigeria because the interest rate is very high. The loans they take from banks, the PPP investors, they are unable to get enough profit to be able to finance the earnings, to finance their costs. So it's a challenge in PPP project financing. Except banks are able to give out loans domestically to the PPP sponsors at concessional interest rate, which is very hard to come by. We may have to continue to see disruption in the PPP project. There must be concessional rate to the sponsors of PPP project. If that is not done, we continue to languish in abandoned projects in Nigeria. Therefore, the way forward is to ensure that we have well-capitalized banks that are supported by the government. The banks should be supported by the government, and we need to also address the issue of recession in the capital market. The capital market, as I said before, is suffering from a lull. We have a bearish capital market at the moment, so you cannot mobilize funds internally. for the PPP project. Therefore, the way forward is to look externally for funding, and that will come through multilateral and bilateral agencies or and international financial institutions. We also have the issue of inflationary rate in the country. Besides that, we also have unstable environment, unstable, investor-friendly environment. The investors' environment is not very stable because of political unrest and economic instability. Therefore, what the government needs to do is to address the issue of political challenges we have in Nigeria, in the northeastern part of Nigeria, and the Niger Delta. If we're able to address those issues, then we'll be able to attract investors to the country. They'll be able to bring their funds to help in the development of PPP projects. Then the issue of 40 project structure is also there. 40 project structure, when you cannot, when there's a mismatch between the assets and the liabilities in PPP project. There's a mismatch because of instability in the exchange rate. When the exchange rate varies, that means you need to look at the initial terms and agreements of the PPP project. And that is one of the reasons why most of these PPP projects, they are abandoned, because they are not able to vary the contract for the sponsors of the project. Therefore, we need to also look at the terms and conditions of the PPP project again, when there is a conflict between government and the private sector, because it's a collaboration. That is the way to go. The way to go is to be able to resolve conflict when the terms of and conditions is varied.
All right, Dr. Ikpefa, thank you very much. Now, just to indicate that we have received a number of tweets from our viewers, we will take those tweets presently. But while we are still on this subject matter of dealing with risk, whether finance or terms of contract, I would like Mr. Ofori Okuma to respond to this aspect. Now, earlier you talked about the political and regulatory risks. The political risks, in some sense, have been elaborated upon by Senator Ben Bruce here with us in the Abuja studios. Some persons believe that some of the PPP transactions are actually sweetheart deals, which is why once you have a change of government or you have a new helmsman, the tendency is to poke at that deal and say, look, bad news, you guys get back to square one. How do we overcome this?
All right, there are different perspectives to this, and let me start by being totally frank. It is not inconceivable that a transaction could have been a sweetheart deal, but I don't think that the default position should be to assume that. Some of the ways that we can avoid the risks of that occurring in future would be, for example, ensuring that your procurement processes are transparent, they're well structured, and that people can actually see what's happened. You also have to have a good look at who are the parties involved. We've talked on the one hand, in fact, a lot about foreign investors. I maintain quite adamantly, and I'm speaking from having sat as both a foreign investor and a local investor, that you need both of them working together. So when you bring a foreign investor or even a local investor with integrity and credibility into a project, and then all of a sudden they find themselves being mired in some kind of innuendo or accusations, that is one of the fastest ways to cause people to leave your country and not want to come back again. But like I said, let's get the procurement process right, and let's not automatically default to accusations of sweetheart deals. Now let's focus on the contract. As the distinguished senator has mentioned a number of times, a contract is a contract. If the parties enter into a contract equitably and they agree to the terms and conditions, then both parties need to do everything they reasonably can to adhere to those terms. Now that being said, I also have to mention that a good and well-structured contract is one where there's as little ambiguity as possible. It's one where, for example, the contract is structured to cater for changes. It is not inconceivable that you may start a project with a given scope, of work to do, and that partway during the contract, either party, but most likely the buyer, wants to have something like a variation done. If that happens, then the contract will provide for who takes the burden of, for example, the additional cost or the delay of doing that.
Once that is determined and it's done quickly and transparently, it needs to be adhered to. So this notion of, after you've signed a contract, you come in and you start changing the terms is bad. The fact of the matter is the contract, if it's well documented and structured, would already have those provisions. And the sanctity of contract is respecting those provisions and abiding by them. Now, let me jump from this point into financing, because the heart of the matter here is about risk. Risk in terms of variability compared to your original expectations. Finance will struggle to come to any project where there isn't comfort or confidence that that agreement based on which these projects are put together will be respected. If the money does come, it may come with very onerous terms, extremely expensive, and many other things. I also have to mention this. Whilst to a large extent I endorse what Dr. Ekbefan is saying, I have to speak from experience in telling you that we need both local and international investment. Multilaterals and DFIs are most welcome, and being frank with you, they tend to provide a lot of the capital that is invested in emerging market environments today. But that being said, you do need to have local investors in, because local investors will have the best long-term alignment and interest for the country. That foreign investor at some point in time will want to repatriate their own capital back to their home base. And who will pick up the what's left behind? It's the local investor. The local investor also has a good understanding and knowledge of the idiosyncrasies of our environment and how we do things here. For that reason, I can assure you, you're going to find that foreign investors always typically want to see local investors also participating. Now, in terms of the cost of financing, Dr. Ekmefa is absolutely right. I personally think local financing is much too high. But we're also seeing some of the intervention funds that, say, the central bank has provided. And I can speak also from experience of projects where the local banks have actually provided tenors much longer than they typically do for other things. But the environment is still extremely risky. Why the interest rates of local banks are high is also because the MPR, as in the benchmark rate, is equally high. And we do have pressures like crowding out by government, which needs to borrow and then is issuing treasury bills and bonds at extremely high yields. That is problematic and needs to be addressed. There are other sources of capital, like pension funds that can invest in infrastructure. The capital market is still in development. There are plans to have infrastructure bonds, but I can tell you this, there is, at today, no project infrastructure bond in the market. There are, however, infrastructure funds such as the one I run, which I can tell you pension funds have already invested in. So we know that these things are evolving. One final point I'll say, so I don't hog too much of your airtime, is this. We must remember that, PPPs are very much like a long-term marriage. Very often, no matter what you're told before marriage, you'll discover in reality when you get into marriage just how unique your relationship with your spouse will be. And very often, you have to work your way through the problems day in, day out around the framework of that institution of marriage. That's pretty much what a PPP is like. And PPPs are still fairly much in their infancy in Nigeria. Are they perfect yet? No, they're not. But you know something? If we are open, honest, and frank, and we learn from the lessons that we have learned so far, I think we'll do well. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Oforio Kuma. But let's take some of our tweets coming in via our Twitter handle, that's at NTAGMN. And the very first one is from Clement Akman. He says, I think if the government could give them a free operating environment, they can make it work.
Aminu Al-Hassan tweets, no country will thrive as long as selfishness, corruption, insecurity, unwillingness, decayed infrastructure, and uncertainty are its insignia.
Sani Mokoji says PPP in Nigeria is a gimmick centered around corruption over the years.
All right, and then we have this from James Odaudu. He says, how can you assure people that concession is not synonymous with job losses, especially in the aviation sector?
Ogu Waja says the major problem of PPPs in Nigeria is the unwillingness of Nigerians to pay for services. Lekki-Ajah Expressway is a perfect example.
And Shitu says on PPP, lawyers who keep working against it need to be advised. Lekki Tollgate is a successful one, though nearly truncated by lawyers. The government also needs to have the will to implement the agreements reached with PPP operators. Failure has cost a lot by the previous governments.
Rupa Lokoson says PPP is just a term on paper. The government still controls most operations to their advantage.
And Bright Irene tweets, what matters to Nigerians at this difficult time is not PPP or privatization, but infrastructure that will create jobs for people.
Michael says government should not have business in business. The involvement of government so far is nothing but failure. The trend should change.
And Kennedy Obiefuna tweets, Mary Bruce, nice, sharp shooter. PPP, ICROS challenge is framework and government's inability to honor contracts. Kudos to the DG. I don't understand this last part of what Obiefuna is writing, but once again, let me take it. Mary Bruce, nice, sharp shooter. PPP, ICROS challenge is framework and government's inability to honor contracts.
Abdullahi says, PPP, I quite agree with Senator Bruce. We can't attain the desired development without making use of the opportunity given by the PPP.
All right, gentlemen, let's come almost in a sense, Fori Okuma appeared to have been given his closing remarks, but we'll still go back to Lagos Network Center, to get the views of our guests. But Mr. Aminu Diko, a point that was raised in the course of this conversation, when you look at the black letter law, when you look at the black letters of the contract, anybody will say, oh yeah, this is a nice regulatory framework, but the mismatch between what is written and the actions by political actors, by those in the MDAs, in the bureaucracy, is cause for concern for those who want to put their money in. What guarantees or what assurances can we begin to get from this time on?
Well, the assurances you have is that there's change in the air. All these concessions you are talking about were not structured through ICRC. They were before ICRC. Currently, every concession agreement that is structured between the public and the private sector has to come through the commission. And we have a team of lawyers who also look at it critically. We are supposed to be an independent party taking care of the interests of both the government and the private sector. So we point out terms in the contract that appear to be onerous or that appear to be going against the grain of PPP. If it will throw up the risk ratio, we'll say so, because there's no point allowing the private sector to be loaded with too much risk that it cannot carry. We know that is a prelude to disaster. It means the contract may fail. So we're taking steps to ensure that these things change from now on. But talking about sweet deals, and let me just comment on it. There are two ways of procuring PPPs. One is the solicited process, where the government itself says, I want to do this project. Anybody who wants to do it, let him come and bid for it. There's another one called unsolicited proposal, where it's the private sector itself who thinks for the government and thinks out a project and said, I think this is going to be good for the government. And he packages everything, spends money and time to develop those projects and brings them to the government. Now, most often, that is what people think is a sweet deal, because that is originated by the private sector. But even as that, there are processes to ensure that this unsolicited proposal is tested for competition. And you do that by either getting a very experienced transaction advisor who will tell you, lead you through the negotiations, or inviting other bids to compete with that process. That way you assure yourself that there's nothing like sweet deals, but a transaction that meets the requirement of competition and transparency.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Aminu Diko. Senator, how do we deal with some of these challenges we have highlighted, the bottlenecks, and then, of course, how do we take advantage of PPP as we see in other parts of the world?
First of all, it's very, very simple. You need to privatize Nigeria. It's simple. Okay, it's very, very simple. You see, people, yeah, you got to privatize Nigeria. First of all, you don't have the money to run the country. If this was a company, Nigeria would be broke and bankrupt. If Nigeria was a company, you understand, you'd be broke and bankrupt. And sometimes people don't think. Let me give you a typical example. Take the National Theatre. I took the head of the Ford Foundation to the National Theatre. When she got there, she said to me, my God, this is an incredible edifice. Do you know that every great Nigerian artist worked on the National Theatre? She said to me, look at the door to the main hall. The door should be taken out professionally and kept in storage while you renovate the place. Because that door, when I was created by Ben, one of the greatest artists of this country, Bruce Onogbakpeya, who was my teacher in school, who is one of the great, his works, Bruce Onogbakpeya, sells for 50 million naira, 100 million naira. Some of a Nigerian artist, someone told me the other day, is an auction in London. A Nigerian artist sold for 200 million naira, one painting. Those are the people that build the National Theatre. You're looking at it as a hall. It is a work of art. It's like the White House. That place is an edifice. So let me ask you this. Should I think for government? Isn't somebody thinking? How can you have a place, an edifice like the National Theatre, which is not just a hall, it's a historic institution, and you let it to rot, and it's sitting there rotting away? Then you sign agreements with people that you have no intention of honoring. Then somebody videotapes the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria because there's a change of government. He decides not to edit the tapes. When I took over NTA, Cockroach at Dawn, Village Headmaster, all those shows, one of the GMs put them in a container under the rain, all got destroyed. So the history of Nigeria is destroyed. If you do a documentary on the Nigerian Civil War, you have to go to ITV or BBC. They asked me to pay £1 million to get the tapes because you don't have the tapes. Your artifacts are held in Europe and North America. And in that case, I'm very happy. Had they brought them back, you would have destroyed them by now. So maybe they should keep them over there.
All right. Well,
so I'm a very angry Nigerian who feels that people in government pay no attention to the people they won an election to look after. And these people should have their IQ measured to find out if they're really qualified to do what they're supposed to do. A guy over here needs, you got to wait. The guy here needs funding to work. Why give him a job if you don't give him funding? Why give the head of BPE a job if you give him no money to supervise the power sector? We have a problem with the power sector, and he cannot supervise it because he doesn't have 1 penny to supervise the power sector.
All right.
So and that guy talking over there from Lagos, he talks like a textbook. I like listening to him.
Well, distinguished Senator Ben Bruce, some of the issues you've raised relate to appropriation. And we hope that the National Assembly will also look into those areas.
I gave everybody money.
Okay.
I gave BP money. I gave NTA money. I gave FRCM money, but the executive reversed it, so I did my job.
We will look into that, particularly with regard to NTA. Senator Ben Bruce, I would like to thank you for being part of our conversation. And we also would like to thank Aminu Diko, Director General of ICRC, that's the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission.
Thank you very much.
And from Lagos, we were joined by Dr. Alemen Ipefan, Associate Professor of Finance at Covenant University, Ota. I would like to thank you for being part of our discussion this morning.
Thank you.
With him there at the Lagos Network Center, we had the Managing Director, CEO of Arm Harith Infrastructure Investment, Mr. Okbuyo Ofori Okuma. Thank you very much for your insights in our conversation this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, it's Good Morning Nigeria. Now we're taking a short break. When we return, it'll be time for our companion segments.
All right, before we take that break, let's go over to our sports desk where Salihu Abdullahi brings us up to date, of course, the latest in the world of sports.
Forest said, we understand 6 persons have been killed and dozens of villages destroyed as a powerful earthquake strikes central Italy. Also, North Korea fires a submarine-launched ballistic missile off its east coast. So, Emi Ajay, our correspondent, has details of the stories.
North Korea fired a submarine-launched ballistic missile off its east coast. South Korea's military said it is the latest in a string of missile launches by Pyongyang in defiance to UN Security Council resolutions. An official of South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the missile was test-fired near the coastal city of Sinpo, where the satellite imagery shows a submarine base is located. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary said the projectile reached Japan's Air Defense Identification Zone, an area of control designated by countries to help maintain air security. At least 6 people are believed to have died after a powerful earthquake struck central Italy, destroying dozens of villages. The first confirmed victims of the earthquake were an elderly couple whose homes collapsed in the March region in the east of the epicenter. The U.S. Geological Survey said it was a 6.2 magnitude quake that hit near the town of Norcia in the region of Umbria. And lastly, an international aid organization has accused British politicians of being in denial and disarray over the selling of arms to...
You're welcome to the weather forecast. This satellite picture of Tuesday afternoon shows weather systems scattered over parts of Chad, Cameroon, and the Central African Republic. This system should energize weather over parts of the country as we expect the eastern flank of the country to be active within the wee hours of Wednesday morning, as there are prospects of thunderstorms to affect Maiduguri, Nguru, Potiskum, Gombe, Damaturu, and the environs. Parts of Bida, Abuja, Jos, Lafia, Yola, Jalingo, and the Mambila Plateau. Rains are likely over Enugu, Ikom, Eket, Port Harcourt, and Calabar axis. As we progress into the afternoon stroke evening hours, there are prospects of thunderstorms to affect the northwestern flank of the country, extending from Sokoto as far as Katsina, Kano, and even parts of Bauchi. There are also prospects of localized thunderstorms to affect parts of the central states and rain showers over the inland areas of the south and the coastal cities. Let's see what temperatures have for us.
And that's where we end this midweek edition of Good Morning Nigeria. Thanks for being a part of the program. We'll be back again tomorrow morning at 7. I'm Rhoda Obo.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join Rhoda in thanking you for starting your day with us. Do enjoy the rest of your day.